was born by the roadside, somewhere in County Kildare.
I think it's all over. It is, and Kildare are the champions. Champions for the first time in 42 years.
And it's the red I will repair.
The Cora of Kildare.
Kildare Speaks with Fiorua. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Kildare Speaks with myself, Fiorua, coming to you from the Midlands of Ireland in a dark October night, and the old lockdowns after going to level 5, so there's plenty of time for you to catch up on all the podcasts I've been doing over the last few months. We're on episode 9 now. Last guest I had was Celine Byrne, soprano, and we got lots of feedback from that. Thank you all. It was really cool actually. I got a bit of feedback from colleagues of mine from primary school and secondary school, and just it's a lovely little connection to make, just interviewing someone you went to school with, which was a really surreal and cool moment. So thanks Celine again for that. And again, we've got loads of other guests as well, from episode 1 to 9, so please check them episodes out. And this episode is episode 9, as I said, and it's before I go on, I just want to thank Kildare County Council again for their kind sponsorship, and remind you all to share and like and do whatever you need to do, but mostly just tell your friends about it and send links to people on the WhatsApp machine and all the rest of it. Yes, episode 9. So episode 9 is connected with Kildare during the War of Independence, because of course this is the centenary of the War of Independence, which took place between 1919 and 1921, following the formation of the first Dáil, the formation of first Dáil was early 1919, but previous to that there was the landslide election of 1918 for Sinn Féin, and a movement towards independence, a guerrilla warfare out in the countryside. But I was curious about what was going on in Kildare, and no better man to ask than James Durney, the well-known author and historian based in, he's from Naas. His office is in the library there, near the library there, in the council offices there in Newbridge, and he's done many books on military history of Kildare and conflict history in Kildare, like the Civil War. He wrote a book on that in Kildare. He's also wrote an interesting book about the Irish who served in Vietnam, presumably under the American flag, and he's a great man to talk to us about what was going on in the War of Independence, because many counties got a serious look in over the last year, because certain counties were just very active, like Clare was one. I was listening to a lot about Clare, Cork obviously after the burning of Cork and different things like that. But what was going on in Kildare? Well, let's find out. Episode 9 of Kildare Speaks features James Durney, and James has a new book called Interned, which is all about those who were interned in the Curragh during the War of Independence. Go and check that out. I was looking online, and you can find it in o'mahonys.ie. You can buy it online there, because obviously a lot of the shops are going to be closed over the next few weeks. You want to buy Christmas presents, you want to buy a book for yourself, sit down not into the fire, but beside the fire, and read a good book on your Kildare history. No better man than James Durney. So look up at his website, it's jamesdurney.com, and as well as that you'll find the Interned book on, as I said, o'mahonys.ie, and I'm sure it's in other bookstores online as well. So thank you to James for joining me, and this is all about the War of Independence in Kildare. Enjoy, folks.
Ye men of the true Irish nation, who follow the tricoloured fold, come join in my sincere lamentation, and mourn the true and the bold.
Hello, James. How are you today?
Good morning, Owen. Feeling great now.
And where are you, in Newbridge, is it?
I'm based in the Newbridge Library building, but we work in the local history and archives department. Okay, all right, good stuff. I was just wondering how you getting on through the lockdown. Is the library open at all, or is the public buildings open? Well, the library's open for click and collect now at the moment, but we're still working away in the background, because we're working on several local history projects, and of course, excuse me, working with the Kildare Decade of Commemorations projects then as well. So we've plenty to do. Yeah, and you have your own offices as such, and I have my own office. There's nobody near me, and we can social distance while we're while we're working away.
Great stuff. Now, James, are you from Naas, is it?
Naas, born and bred on. Born in Naas and lived all my life in Naas.
In the town itself?
In the town itself, yeah. I was born on the Carrow Road there in the old artisans' cottages, the first social housing in Naas, which led me to have a big interest in social housing in my own town.
Yeah. And was Naas one of the first towns, even in the county or in the country, that were coming on with social housing? Or
would have been one of the first in the county. In 1899 was the housing of the working classes, and that was an act that was brought in by the British government.
And was that connected with the military presence in Kildare? Or?
No, it was just the house. People at that time, of course, much like it is now, a lot of people were renting. Very few people owned their house,
right?
At that time, so this was to get people out of really bad housing conditions and into decent housing.
Okay. And I suppose the population of Kildare would have probably been a little bit bigger than your average rural county.
It was around 70,000-80,000 at that time, I think.
Okay.
Naas would have been 3,000 or 4,000, would have been small enough, but big enough as well.
So growing up in Naas and being a young boy and growing into your teenage years, into your secondary school period, was history something that you were interested in, or did it develop later on?
No, history was always something I was interested in because we lived with my great aunt, who reared my mother, and she had a great interest in history. She had lived through the whole period. She was born in 1898, so she knew everything firsthand. She knew about the First World War. She knew about the Black and Tans, the Civil War, the War of Independence, all that, even the Second World War, and everything.
You think that history is much, much better coming directly from the source sometimes? I mean, we're after losing a whole generation that would have remembered that period.
Yeah, and that was it. I grew up at her. She died in 1979. So all through my teenage years and my younger years, I was listening to these old stories about what happened in Naas, and mainly just Naas and that. And she was at Michael Collins's funeral, and the week before that she'd been at Arthur Griffith's funeral, stood, she says, in the same spot at both of their funerals. And that.
My dad,
this was... it was just first-hand knowledge.
Yes, yeah. My dad, he tells me sometimes that when he used to be a child, and he'd be one of his uncles, I think it was, or one of his mother's friends, whatever. He used to go up, and my grandmother, his mother, used to say, "Go tell your man about how much you love Michael Collins," or something like that. And it was just the big division. The old treaty divisions were still there, and he would genuinely get angry about it. I mean, we do forget that this is something that they lived through, and it was very present in their lives.
Yeah, and she had a great fondness for Michael Collins as well. I suppose everyone, I mean, she would have been only a teenager at that time. So, Collins had been in Naas. I'm sure she was there at the big meeting there in 1922 trying to get the treaty passed and all that. So, I mean, these people saw all these things. Even the Titanic, as we were growing up, she said that the carpets for the Titanic were made in Naas, and when you're a teenager and that, and you kind of but these things are true, and there are all these local links, and that's really what kind of interested me in history.
And did you go and study it then, or did you just keep your interest in it?
Well, I was fond of it in school and that, but when I went to the Naas Tech, then they didn't do history, they didn't do geography, and these were my two top subjects.
Isn't that amazing? I've heard about that. That was that the situation right up to the 80s or the 70s?
Well, I left in 77, so yeah, I think it was up until the 80s easy, because these were my two best subjects. So I didn't do well in school, really, and I kind of lost interest in school. It was only later on, when I was in my 40s then, that when my children were kind of going to college themselves, that I decided that maybe I should go to college, just to improve my writing. Yeah. And a lot of people that were involved in local history and that said that, when I started writing, that I needed to, learn how to do things properly, how to reference everything, because history's not, it can be...
It can be academic at times.
It can be academic, but it can be you can make it very local and very personal as well, but you need to be able to reference and let other people
balance,
know where these things come from. So I went to Maynooth then, and I did a history degree in the evenings. Right.
Took me 5 years to do a degree in that.
Brilliant. But I think I did a master's myself when I was in my mid-30s, and I think I really appreciated it much more than if I was 21 doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really loved it now.
Because you have the passion for it. You've lived a life already.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So let's get down to business here. We're in the middle of this decade of commemoration stuff, which has took a huge blow, I imagine. Well, I imagine through the COVID thing, it's just been whitewashed a bit, but it's still very much existing and happening, and there's events happening, and there's a lot of stuff happening online with Kildare decade of commemorations. It's been happening since 2016, is that right?
It is, yeah, and even before it, we start thinking about this, myself and Mario Corrig and Carol Kiley, and that we start here in Newbridge Library, we start thinking about this in around the Titanic period, which is 1913, and that was our first kind of link to the decade of commemorations, which evolved then, because
so is this just exclusively in Kildare then, or is it nationwide?
Oh no, it's nationwide.
Oh yeah.
But we were thinking about this before it became even nationwide, and we began to commemorate things like the sinking of the Titanic, and about Kildare people and Kildare connections to the Titanic. And then, of course, you had the Great Lockout then as well. And again, of course, there was, in North Kildare, and that there was some strikes and that were part of the whole lockout and that.
And the First World War.
The First World War comes along then. Then you have 1916 and Kildare's participation in the Rising and that. And then you're into the War of Independence.
So we're into the War of Independence, 1919 to 1921. Can we just start by kind of looking from post-1916, where, obviously the leaders were executed and many of the rebels were sent off to, is it Francock or places like that?
Francock and jails in England then as well. But it's when these prisoners come back at the end of 1916 that the reorganisation of Sinn Féin and the Republican movement begins in County Kildare and in other places as well. Now, one of the main men involved in this was Patrick Colgan, who had been with Michael Collins in Francock. And Collins gives him the order to organise Kildare when he goes back. And that's what he does. Patrick Colgan was from Maynooth.
Right, okay.
And he had fought in 1916 then.
And Maynooth had a huge connection with 1916 with that walk that they did along the canal as well.
Yeah, that's it. Like the 15 men that had walked to Maynooth to Dublin to take part in the Rising and that. And he's one of them. So he's one of the more prominent and more dedicated volunteers. And when he comes back, then he sets about reorganising the county. And this is what Collins does. In Francock, he gets a lot of people together and he gives them the jobs of organising their counties when they go back.
Okay, so the county thing is a big deal. It's like regional areas that people can focus on and organise.
Exactly, yeah. And
it was a small world back then, I mean, I was just thinking the other night of what was it like back then, before, because I knew I was going to be interviewing you. I was thinking, imagine it as an individual person in rural Ireland. It was a dark, big world. And, how do you organise this mass amount of, in them days, it would have been a huge area to try and organise and to try and penetrate.
And it is, as you say, it's a dark place, when the lights go out in the evening, it's very dark. I mean, you have to cycle to these places, you have to walk to these places. And then if you're to try and organise an ambush or anything like that, it's not that, that you have all the artificial light that we have around. So even that is a handicap. The road system then as well, communications, of course. It's a huge, huge handicap to try and organise these things.
So we're talking late 1916 up to 1919 was all about organisation, is that right?
Yeah, into 1917 is the big year when, say around the spring of 1917 is the big year when the Irish Volunteers are reorganised, when Sinn Féin is reorganised. And then there's some local by-elections then as well, and Sinn Féin dips their toes in the water to see how to get on, and they do pretty well. So you have the 1918 election, then the general election,
a huge moment
and this is a huge moment for Sinn Féin. So they wipe the boards to take,
and this is obviously the Westminster election, but they don't take their seats. Is that right?
Election. They don't take their seats. They form the first Dáil then as well, and we have two Kildare men elected in the county, Donal O'Buchala and Art O'Connor.
O'Buchala was the Maynooth guy, yeah. Maynooth guy, and Art O'Connor is from Selbridge.
Right.
So we have 2 local TDs then representing Kildare in the Dáil. And
the Dáil